if Darth Vader ruled Tatooine? In the original timeline, Vader allies with Jabba the Hutt on certain occasions throughout the comics in order to help further his personal agenda and that of the Empire. However, over on one of our old YouTube videos, Creepy Cody asked, what if instead Vader had killed Jabba and become the daimyo of Tatooine? So everyone buckle up, because that's the situation we're going to be exploring today, and I can guarantee you it takes us on some fun turns. Grab your popcorn and let's dive right in. To start our story, Vader has once again helped to bring order to the galaxy alongside his master, and he sits in his meditation chamber dwelling upon his past. How had he arrived at this moment? Anger flows through him, particularly as he remembers his mother's treatment at the hands of the Tusken Raiders and the Hutts. Anakin never wanted to set foot on Tatooine again. However, this itch kept pestering him. One day, while training with Sidious, the Emperor asks Anakin about it, feeling his frustration. Anakin tells his master that it was nothing, but Sidious can feel that this is more than just his usual dark side agitation. He knows that whatever is bothering Vader will impede him from his duties as an enforcer. He can also sense that whatever is agitating his apprentice would help him get in touch with his dark side emotions more if he resolved it. Rage, vengeance, and suffering were what Vader was experiencing. So, Sidious tells Vader to go and sort out his emotions and get to the root of whatever was bothering him, completing his descent into the dark master that he was meant to become. Again, Vader doesn't want to go to Tatooine, but he's been ordered to deal with his issues by his master, and he decides that he must go. Vader hops into a Lambda-class shuttle, taking a few Imperial officers and a small contingent of clones with him, and pilots it to Tatooine. This one simple decision alters the timeline dramatically. As the contingent travels through hyperspace, the troops and officers are incredibly quiet. Vader is still an enigma to many in the Empire, some not even knowing if he actually exists or if he's just an Academy bedtime story that instructors told recruits to scare them into submission. Eventually, after many hours of near silence in the shuttle's cabin, one of the officers inquires as to what the plan is upon their arrival. Vader continues to stare straight ahead, looking deep into the lines of hyperspace, not responding. For a moment, this officer wonders if the Dark Lord was suffering from the condition known as hyperspace madness. He asks again, going as far as to tap Vader on the shoulder pads. But before the officer is able to touch him, Vader raises his hand, stopping it in mid-air with the Force. Vader tells the officer that all will be revealed in time. For now, his job was to wait until they arrived. The officer, feeling the Force's grasp alleviate on his hand, whimpers a response and returns to the back of the shuttle with the other commanders and clones. Vader continues to pilot the shuttle on his own, reminiscing about the days of Anakin Skywalker's humble beginnings as a slave pod racer on Tatooine. However, Anakin Skywalker was dead. When the shuttle came out of hyperspace, Tatooine loomed in the window. It was still a backwater scug hole like Anakin had grown up on, and the old emotions began to bubble in Vader. Just like when Anakin had massacred the Tuskens all those years ago, Vader was ready to deal some real damage to all those who had wronged him on this world. Soon, Vader would have vengeance. Vader touches the Imperial shuttle down in Mos Espa, knowing exactly who the first person that he was going to exact his revenge upon would be. As soon as the shuttle lands, the city goes quiet. The normally bustling markets and small bars are quiet, silently watching in fear as the Imperials descend upon the ramp of their ship. Workers stare in awe, blown away that the Empire had actually made the trek out to their world. Many of the criminals, lowlifes, and average people that live on Tatooine just assume that the Empire would be too busy in the core to care about their backwater world. Evidently, that was not the case. Eventually, Vader reaches his old home and his former slave workplace, Watto's junk shop. With his crew in tow, he uses the Force to fling open the doors forcefully. I was pretty proud of that pun, but don't feel obligated to laugh. And he saunters in, his black cape billowing behind him. Watto is in the process of doing business with some shady-looking Rodian folks, who Vader demands leave immediately. Recognizing the Imperial officers and the clones, the clients scuttle out quickly, not wanting to interfere with an Imperial operation. Vader walks straight towards Watto, looking him directly in the eyes from behind the black helmet. Watto asks if he can help the good Imperials, hovering towards them. Mid-flight, Vader sticks his hand into the air and begins force-choking the Toydarian salesman. Watto squirms, feeling his throat begin to collapse in on itself. Vader approaches closer, eventually coming face to face with his former master. Watto pleads for mercy. Vader snarls back at him, asking if that is what Watto had shown for Shmi Skywalker. In that moment, Watto's eyes went even wider. Vader drops him to the ground, turning his back towards Watto. Watto thanks him for his forgiveness and promises he'll never use slaves or underpaid workers ever again. Then, Vader scoffs, asking who had said anything about mercy, and then pulls out his newly bled red lightsaber crystal, as we see in the Vader comics, slicing the Toydarian in two before the alien even knew what was happening. The contingent of Imperial officers maintain straight faces, but Vader can sense their discomfort. Local slaver. Our mission on this planet is to teach the local crime lords and scum that the Empire's in charge now, not them. The Emperor commissioned this directly. Vader explains, which is technically true. Let's move out. We have more work to do. Vader decides that his next move would be against Jabba the Hutt, the real boss of Tatooine. He tells one of his officers and a small section of clone troopers to peel off and continue their patrol of the city, ensuring that nobody went out of line. The officer salutes him, and Vader takes the rest of the contingent back to the Lambda-class shuttle. They fly it closer to Jabba's palace, landing almost directly outside. As Vader continues to push closer into the desert, he can't help but sense a familiar presence. It seems like Obi-Wan. However, Vader dismisses this as just an act of trickery from the Force. He believes that somehow this is either another test from his master or one from the Force itself. Vader shakes it off, knowing that he had larger priorities to focus on in that moment. As the ship touches down just outside of the palace, the Imperials are promptly greeted by a small group of Gamorrean guards, accompanied by a protocol droid translator. Vader remains silent as the officers do the talking, demanding that the Gamorreans immediately take them to see Jabba. Initially, the Gamorreans refuse, snorting that the Empire isn't welcome here. However, they change their tune when Vader reaches out his hand and lifts them both into the air, constricting their breathing. Following that, the Gamorreans are more willing to let the group pass, and Vader enters the palace with his Imperial lackeys. As Vader enters Jabba's throne room, the music being played by Max Rebo goes silent, and hushed whispers overtake the crowd. Jabba mumbles something in Huttese, and the protocol droid beside him translates what he says, that he is displeased with the sudden intrusion from the Empire on his land. Vader hears none of this. He knows that Jabba's criminal empire still continues to enslave many of the locals on Tatooine, including the Twi'lek dancer that Vader interrupted atop the Rancor pit. Immediately, Vader reaches out his gloved hand, taking Jabba by the throat of his slug-like body and approaches him. While Jabba had not been the Hutt who had actually owned him and Shmi, Anakin and Vader still had hatred for all of the Hutts about how they treated slaves across the galaxy. He had no intention of giving this overgrown worm any semblance of mercy. Many of the bounty hunters in the room raise their weapons and begin to fire. They're quickly suppressed by the formidable combat prowess of the clone trooper guard and the officers that are with Vader. One notable exception is Boba Fett, who stands in the corner and watches as an observer, in his father's armor, which doesn't quite fit him yet in his young age. Finally, Anakin reaches Jabba, standing face to face with the slimy Hutt. He demands to know where Gardulla was, the Hutt who had once owned him and his mother. Jabba continues to squirm, telling Vader that he honestly has no idea, but that it is a safe bet that they would be with the Hutt Council on Nal Hutta. Vader thanks Jabba for this information before once again pulling out his lightsaber and stabbing him through his blubber, killing the sleazy crime lord. Bib Fortuna, who had been cowering in the corner, begs for his life from Vader, saying that he would serve the Empire loyally if he was allowed to live. Vader turns his head towards Boba Fett, one of the few bounty hunters who had managed to stay out of the conflict. Boba pauses for a moment and then shakes his head slowly. Vader turns back to the cowering Twi'lek and slices him down, killing him. Vader uses the Force to lift Jabba's body off the throne, open the hole of the Rancor pit, and throw the massive Hutt down there for food. He also kicks the body of Bib down the hole before closing it again, knowing that the beast would be satisfied for some time with that meal. As for the Twi'lek that Vader had seen dancing upon arrival, who had skittered off into the corner when the Empire started shooting, Vader decides to allow her to leave, free from the horrible life that this Hutt master had put her in. Vader turns off his lightsaber and sits on the throne, breathing heavily. Vader knows that there are many criminals to take care of on this backwater world, and he knew that he would have to make an example of them for the rest of the galaxy to see while he followed his purpose of avenging those who had wronged him in the past. He calls Boba over, offering the bounty hunter a sizable payday from the Empire if he were to serve as one of his enforcers on Tatooine. The bounty hunter nods, looking forward to gaining some more of a reputation, especially as someone who is still young in the game. Following this altercation, Vader calls his master via hologram. Sidious answers, inquiring as to the status of Vader's personal mission. Vader replies that it is not yet finished, and that he plans on setting up a base of operations for the Empire on Tatooine in order to secure further control of the Outer Rim for the military. He also requests that the Empire send more clones to Tatooine so that Vader would have a larger, more effective Outer Rim security force. At this point, The Stormtrooper program is still in its infancy, so clones are still the Empire's primary foot soldiers. The Emperor obliges, happy that Vader is taking the initiative to secure more of the Outer Rim for the Empire and is still planning on carrying out his duties as a dark side enforcer. A few days later, Vader whips the local crime lords into shape and secures their loyalty to the Empire through some aggressive negotiations, we'll put it, and the clone contingent arrives. And much of Tatooine is supportive of the Imperial presence on their world, especially since many of the high-ranking criminals are hired on by the Empire for lucrative jobs as advisors. Vader makes it perfectly clear that if any of them were caught slaving or dealing in other illegal activities, their employment and their lives would be promptly terminated. Because of Vader's iron fist bringing order to some of the more sleazy parts of Tatooine, many are supportive of his rule. After Vader's request for more support, Palpatine continues to oblige his apprentice's desires, seeing that there are results, and he sends more clones as he's able to. After a few months of building Tatooine, Vader is ready to expand further across the Outer Rim. Particularly, he decides that now is the time to take on his largest rivals in this corner of the galaxy, the Hutts. Finally, his revenge on Gardulla would come. Hey folks, if you're enjoying this story, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications as we update this channel weekly with new What If content. Now, back to the story. In planning the operation, however, no matter how hard he tries, Vader can't get the nagging feeling of Kenobi being nearby out of his mind. The small feeling that he had when arriving on Tatooine persisted, and something didn't feel right about that. As Vader was busy planning the assault on the Hutt Council, he asked Boba to look into this and see if he had heard any nearby rumblings of Jedi. Boba began to grow infamous on the planet's surface for being a ruthless killer, someone that Vader could get to do the dirty work for those who crossed him. But they weren't important enough for him to go visit himself. Boba obliges, knowing that this will be another big payday for him, and he begins to poke around the city of Mos Espa with a few other Imperial goons. Finally, after months of precarious planning, Vader leaves one of his original Imperial officer companions in charge of this little fiefdom within the Empire as he leads his army of scoundrels and Imperials towards Nal Hutta. He meditates in solitude on the way there, knowing that this would finally be his moment of ultimate revenge against the scum who wronged him in the past. As he meditates, old feelings begin to bubble within him, feelings that he had felt as a child under the cruel hand of Gardulla the Hutt. Soon, these Hutts would feel his wrath and the wrath of the Empire. There would be no mercy shown by Vader to these immoral, chaotic slavers. Upon Vader's arrival on Nal Hutta, it is clear that the Hutts are prepared for a visit. It seems that they still had loyalists on Tatooine and other spies in the Outer Rim who were informing them of this Imperial buildup. The Hutt ships immediately open fire on the Imperial Armada, and Vader is rocked from his meditation. While the naval officers and pirates turned Imperials battle in the skies, Vader takes out his own personal TIE fighter and begins to maneuver it to the surface, weaving through starfighters and blasts from the cannons on either side. He still maintains the claim to being one of the most brilliant pilots in the galaxy, and he takes out many small Hutt interceptors and fighters before zooming towards the surface of Nal Hutta. Vader doesn't care about the battle in the sky, or the ground itself. He just wants to see the Hutt Council dead. He lands on the same landing pad that Maul did with the Mauldalorians in the Clone Wars and exits his TIE, feeling the humidity underneath his suit almost immediately. He's greeted by a multitude of Weequay, Gamorrean, and Gank guards, along with some hired bounty hunter guns that Vader mows down quite quickly. Similar to how he slaughters the rebels in the hallway during the scene in Rogue One. No one can match Vader's power. He enters the chambers of the Hutt Council, looking at the slimy slugs sitting before him. Some of them are in holographic form, but Vader doesn't care much about them. Gardulla is there, sitting pretty on her throne with fear in her eyes, and with the translator protocol droid sitting to her right. She makes a comment about how the Empire isn't welcome in Hutt space, which is its own government separate from that of the rest of the galaxy. Vader scoffs at this, stating that their sovereign state was merely a front for them to run criminal operations throughout the ruts of the galaxy and skirt the rules that everyone else has to follow. Vader says that he would no longer allow this to happen. The Empire was here to finally bring order to Hutt space. Gardulla says that greater have tried and failed in the past. Vader clenches his fist at his side and shoves the other one forward, throwing Gardulla's throne backwards and pushing her on her back. Gardulla squirms, unable to turn herself over, and Vader saunters towards her, the click of his boots echoing through the throne room. Gardulla swears at him in Huttese, and the other Hutts present watch, their fear palpable to the Dark Lord of the Sith. Vader preys on this, using it to fuel him as he finally comes to the Hutt and places his boot on her face. Gardulla blubbers something as Vader grinds her face deeper into the ground, savoring his victory.
The Empire rules here now, Hutts,
Vader announces.
and I want you all to remember that.
The Sith Lord slices Gartula, finally silencing her obstinate Hutt cries. After seeing how Anakin treats Gartula and not wanting to meet the same fate, the rest of the Hutts agree to surrender to the Empire's jurisdiction. They surrender the battle in the skies, and they allow for an Imperial governor to preside over their space. Vader appoints another one of his trusted officers who had started with him on his journey to Tatooine to oversee Hutt Space's integration into the Empire, and then he returns to Tatooine on his own. As Vader flies through hyperspace on his own, he receives a transmission from Boba Fett. He was told that while there had been no progress in finding any Jedi, there had been a small group of moisture farmers that had pushed back on Imperial development over their land, and that their leader had been captured in Mos Eisley. Boba was holding the leader in prison, and Vader's Tatooine palace that he had stolen from Jabba. Vader landed, and he quickly went to see who this insurgent was. To his shock, it was somebody from Anakin's past. Standing before Vader in the Tatooine dungeons was Owen Lars, his stepbrother. For a moment, Vader was taken aback by shock. Obviously, the possibility of seeing Owen again had crossed his mind, but the Lars family had always been one to stick to their own business. Owen must have really been pissed off to challenge the Empire in such a fashion. For a few moments, Owen screams at Vader, telling him that his Imperial lackeys were stealing land from farmers and destroying livelihoods. He also remarks that many traditional farms that had been in place for generations were now being torn up to establish more military or commercial infrastructure. Vader remarks in turn that Owen should be grateful, as the Empire had come to bring prosperity and order to a planet that had been smothered in the chaotic grip of the Hutts for centuries. Owen remarks that surely Vader would never get away with this, and that one day he would pay for his actions against the people of Tatooine. Vader scoffs, remarking that he believes it will be the other way around. Vader calls Boba Fett via hologram and thinks of an idea. He commands Boba to go to the Lars homestead with some of the Imperial soldiers and destroy it, burning it to the ground. If there is any resistance from the family, Vader gave Boba full permission to deal with them using disintegrations, a practice that the young bounty hunter had become particularly fond of during his time as Vader's enforcer. So, Boba and a platoon of clones make the journey to Owen's moisture farm. Owen cries out in anger, begging Vader not to follow through with it. Vader states coldly that Owen should have thought about the consequences to his actions before this insurrection. Owen spits back that nonviolent protest isn't insurrection, and that his family had nothing to do with this. Owen continues to yell at Vader while he simply sits, waiting for Boba to reach his destination. A few moments later, the holographic image of Boba returns, and he faces the Lars homestead. Vader watches Beru as she runs out of the house with a small child in her arms, asking what's going on. Boba ignores her, and the Imperials begin to do their worst. Beru cries out in pain as the Imperials torch her house, burning everything that she had known for the last decade to the ground. The child in her arms also begins to cry, and Vader can't help but sense something about that child as he watches the scene unfold. What he senses is unclear, but it seems that this child had a strong Force connection.
Is that your son?
Vader inquires. Owen responds by telling Vader that he might as well be, because his father had died in the Clone Wars, and now it was his job to raise the boy on his own. Owen then says harshly that Vader had just taken away the only home that the boy had ever known. Vader contemplates this, wondering if maybe, possibly, because of the strong Force connection and the connection to his homeworld, that this could be his son, or rather, the son of Anakin Skywalker. Suddenly, a commotion breaks out in the hologram. Some of the clones start shooting at something, and Boba turns his head to look towards it. For a moment, the feed is disrupted by a massive cloud of sand blocking the hologram transmission. There are some flashes, some cries of astonishment, and through the dust, a hazy blue light is visible. Vader's heart drops into his stomach. No, it couldn't possibly be. Was that the Jedi that he had been sensing for the last year, the last few months? Was that Obi-Wan? Sure enough, within moments, the dust settles. The clone platoon is dead on the ground, and Boba is nowhere to be seen. There, standing directly in front of the holographic projector on the troop transport that Boba was using, is Obi-Wan Kenobi in his full glory, his long brown hair flowing in the wind. Vader demands that some of the clones nearby keep watch over Owen, and then he immediately hops on a speeder bike and rides towards the Lars homestead as fast as possible. So it hadn't been a test. Vader truly had been sensing the presence of his old master. Maybe that is why he felt a calling towards this place. The Force was prompting him to confront his past fully. After a speedy trip through the desert, Vader arrives at the homestead. Owen's adopted son is still bawling in Beru's arms, and Obi-Wan is there attempting to console the pair. The bodies of clones still scatter the property and smoke billows from the old house. As soon as Vader dismounts his speeder, he notices Obi-Wan's demeanor change. His old master stands straight, and Vader can sense fear emanating from Obi-Wan. Vader smiles. He would finally, truly have his full revenge. There was no need for Vader to say a word. He simply pulls his lightsaber from his belt and ignites it, eager to duel Obi-Wan. Now, dear viewers, the moment that you've all been waiting for, the duel between Vader and Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan turns towards Vader, his face filled with determination. His eyes are dark and he ignites his lightsaber in turn, striking his signature defensive pose. Obi-Wan pleads with Anakin, sensing his presence in the Force behind the dark Sith mask, asking him to turn away from this path of darkness. Vader laughs, stating that Anakin is dead, before using the Force to stir up a whirlwind of his favorite thing, sand, and throwing it in Obi-Wan's direction. The Jedi is temporarily caught off guard, and Vader takes advantage of this, striking at Obi-Wan. He manages to fend off the strikes, just barely, using his devotion to protecting Luke, who is mere meters away, as motivation to continue fighting against his former apprentice. Obi-Wan uses the Force to clear his senses, remembering the words of both Yoda and Qui-Gon, and that the eyes can sometimes deceive, and that the Force should be one's only true guide. Because of the sand irritation, Obi-Wan can't see very well anyway, so he closes his eyes, recentering himself in the Force, trusting his intuition for Vader's next attack. Naturally, Vader continues to strike with brutal ferocity, and Obi-Wan uses his mastery of Form 3 lightsaber combat to parry and use Vader's momentum against him. Eventually, Vader becomes fed up with Obi-Wan's games. He reaches out his hand, grabbing Obi-Wan's throat with his invisible grip, choking his old master. Vader revels in Obi-Wan's physical suffering, savoring the feeling of his discomfort in the Force. Then, Vader thinks of an even better idea to torture his former master.
You always have been one to stand up for the helpless, haven't you, Kenobi?
Vader remarks. Then he walks over to Beru, still holding Obi-Wan in his grasp, and runs the poor woman through with his lightsaber. Obi-Wan chokes out a breath of sorrow, his cries being caught in his throat. Vader drops him into the sand, and Obi-Wan breathes heavily for a moment, while Vader goes towards baby Luke, picking him up in his arms, feeling a familiar presence in the Force while cradling him. Obi-Wan calls out, still reeling from the chokehold that Vader had inflicted upon him. Obi-Wan begs Vader not to kill the boy and to give the child to him. Vader turns towards his former master, feeling rage bubble within him. This Jedi had the audacity to tell him, the Dark Lord of the Sith, what to do while he was writhing on the ground in pain. Vader could feel his fist clenching again, and he sees Obi-Wan clench his neck again for a second time. Obi-Wan reaches out desperately for his lightsaber, which lays in the sand nearby, but Vader steps on it before it can gain momentum by a Force pull. He maintains his Force choke on Kenobi and looks deep into his eyes.
I will train the boy. I know who he is, Kenobi. I could sense his power from the moment that I saw him, and I could sense Owen's deception. I know why the Force called me here now. Old man, you lost,
Vader says. Obi-Wan manages to squeak out a line about there still being hope for the galaxy, before Vader brutally snaps his neck, causing Obi-Wan's body to fall to the ground, prey to the sand. Vader picks up his old master's lightsaber from beneath his boot and clips it onto his belt, still holding Luke in his arms. As the Lars homestead burns behind him, Vader takes Luke and brings him to the speeder, cradling him tight as he rides back to his dark palace. Vader pulls up to the palace on his speeder, beginning to feel the sand grind in his various suit parts. He doesn't like sand. There, he finds Boba Fett, who had managed to escape Obi-Wan's rescue attempt. Boba's armor was battered, and he had a few scratches, but the young bounty hunter looks relatively okay. Boba apologizes to Vader, but Vader waves it off. He states that Kenobi would be a worthy adversary for anyone, and that although he didn't like the man, he respected his battle prowess. Vader states that there will be plenty more people to defeat in the future, and that because of Boba's success in the past, he would not be dying today. When Boba notices the child, he inquires about him. Vader says only that this child will be the future of the Empire, and that together they would rule the Outer Rim with an iron fist. Vader goes into the dungeon to meet Owen after this. Vader tells him that he knows that this child is his, to which Owen spits profanities in response. Vader grows tired of Owen's frustrating madness, and he finally severs the last remaining tie to Anakin Skywalker on this planet. He kills Owen with his lightsaber. The Force had led Vader to Tatooine for a reason. Finally, he could completely eradicate his ties to his old self while bringing glory to the Sith into the Empire. Vader relishes in his vengeance, allowing it to fuel him. Finally, he could fully commit himself to the ways of the dark side without distractions. After this, Vader calls Palpatine. He informs him of what has happened with the Hutts, with the Lars family, and with Kenobi. Palpatine is pleased with his apprentice. Not only had he managed to overcome his challenge from the Force, but he had also managed to expand the Empire's influence into new sectors of the galaxy. And another Jedi was dead. Truly, the dark side was strong with Vader. Vader closed by informing Palpatine that he had found the son of Anakin Skywalker, and that he had immediately sensed his power. So, Vader had taken him on to be his own and to mold him in his own twisted image. Palpatine strokes his chin at this, wondering if this would end up destroying the rule of two that had governed the Sith for millennia. However, Palpatine saw too much potential in the boy. He knew that if they didn't train him, the potential would be lost for another legendary Sith warrior. So he permits Vader to train Luke under his wing with Sidious's supervision. How do these events impact the finale of our story? Well, let's find out. Over the next decade, Vader remains at his post in the Outer Rim. He oversees the transformation of many planets into industrial powerhouses that produce goods for the Empire. He proves to be a popular figure among the people due to his early crackdown on the crime syndicates, which lead to an overall safer city street and less slavery. Vader's Imperial enforcers are brutal, cutting down people for the smallest infractions of the law. Because the Empire provides jobs and has brought order to a once chaotic corner of the galaxy, people are pleased though. Vader's popularity earns him the rank of Grand Moff from the Emperor, allowing Vader to have equal footing with Tarkin on political issues. Because of the thinly spread nature of the Outer Rim, there are certainly some groups that pop up to challenge Vader's authority every so often, but their leadership is quickly squashed by either Rising Star, Boba, or Vader himself. Vader raises Luke, training him in the ways of the dark side, molding him into the young warrior that he knows Luke has the potential to become. Sure enough, from a young age, Luke shows incredible promise. Because of his youth, Luke is even able to master some techniques that Vader was never able to, such as Force lightning. One day, Luke would be another fine addition to Vader's army. Perhaps one day, the pair would even be able to take down the Emperor himself and rule the galaxy side by side. One thing that Vader doesn't know about, though, is Leia Organa, the daughter of the senator from Alderaan. While she rises in prominence in galactic politics, Vader pays little attention. What does he care of some girl from a rich political family? However, perhaps Vader's lack of attention to this detail would be his undoing. After all, Obi-Wan did say that there was still hope for the galaxy. Maybe one day, this vivacious young girl would be able to challenge the Empire, stirring up hope in the galaxy that is under the tread of the Imperial boot of the Empire. I really hope that you guys enjoyed this what-if scenario. If you did, please consider checking out this video, What If Obi-Wan Didn't Leave Anakin on Mustafar? Cheers folks, have a great day, and be sure to get in your daily dose of Bantha Stew.